I have the audacity to believe that people everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits. Martin Luther King, Jr. I'd like to speak to you today about our global neighborhood. Access to our global neighborhood has expanded a great deal over the last 20 years, thanks to technology. I know when I was younger, I knew that people were hurting and fighting and struggling and dying all over the world. Thanks to TV and the internet today, it's much more in our face. We see it every time we turn around. Yet we still really don't see areas across the world as our neighborhood, and the people as our neighbors. Martin Luther King Jr. had the boldness to believe in a global neighborhood, where all neighbors can have what they need. This is what he saw. This is what he believed, long before our neighborhood became so accessible. Yet still, it is so far from being a reality. Today's scripture reading is one of the most well-known parables and very easy to relate to current day. Jesus taught this parable to challenge the religious establishment of that day. And today, Christ is once again getting in our face, challenging us to open our eyes to our neighbors. As we look around our global neighborhood, and as we put this parable into current perspective. The lawyer asked a question that still perplexes society. He knew the law. Love your neighbor as yourself. In this scripture, the lawyer asks, who is my neighbor? And the answer Jesus gave expanded the view of neighborhood far beyond the lawyer's vision. 2,000 years after Jesus answered that question, we are still asking, who is my neighbor? Sadly, we are still not following Christ's directive. You see, neighborhood and neighbor is not defined by location or by group, but those who are in need and concern. God created all people, and our concern for all people is called to be strong enough to break the barriers found in the world. Now we live side by side with people who differ from us. Different races, different religions, different economic status. We are surrounded by God's people, some alike and some different, all that need our help. Through this parable, we see that we can respond in different ways to our neighbors, to those in need in the world. And Jesus not only tells us here, but he shows us throughout his life how to know and how to love our neighbor. We could respond with the attitude of, what's yours is mine. Just like the robbers, we too can be driven by greed, where another's life is of little to no value. We can be the bully on the block who cares only about self. And in our competitive society today, many are driven to the channel of WIIFM. What's in it for me? Or we could respond with the what's mine is mine attitude. Just like those men, we can be driven by selfishness. And yes, to help might delay or hinder our schedules. How many people, if you think deeply enough, see some people as trouble we try to avoid? Are there times we choose to close our eyes to them and just walk by on the other side? cringe when we are asked to give up something that is important to us. Maybe it's our time or our resources or even our convenience. It's good to remind ourselves that all we have comes from God, and that we were put on this earth to make a contribution, not simply to consume resources. You see, the world teaches us Cain's philosophy of life: am I my brother's keeper? God's answer is yes. Yes, you are. Jesus wants us to love by loving people, serve him by serving people, to minister to others, and not just to take care of our own needs. Or we could respond with the wonderful attitude of, what is mine is yours. Like the Samaritan, we can be driven by compassion. You see, compassion demanded that he stop and help this man. And compassion can be what we are about. Compassion sees the preciousness of a human soul. It comes from the heart. The Samaritan in the parable was willing to use what he had for the good of others, to share his abilities and his time and his resources. He lived with generosity. We can choose to do so as well. Jesus revealed and demonstrated the principles of life. You see, life is not found in living for self, but is found in giving of self, in the service to God and to others. Jesus came to earth to seek and to save the lost, to serve, not be served. Jesus cared for the whole person, body, soul, and spirit. We are called to follow that example. A while back, I was reading something on Facebook that caught my attention, and it read, many years ago, a survivor of a Nazi death camp wrote these embittered words: here's to a world that did not care. Here's to those who had eyes but would not see, to those who had ears but would not hear, to those who had voices but would not speak. When it comes to the people around you, your neighbors, how well do you see? How well do you hear? Do you care about the people that have been wounded by life? Or do you have blinders on that limit the scope of your vision? Those are questions that may best be answered by you as the individual through a conversation with your Creator. We are called to respond to the needs around us. The Good Samaritan saw that there was pain and suffering and a need, and he responded. Jesus expects his people to act, not to remain silent and ignore what is happening around us. And you see, it's one thing to talk about human suffering, and yet another to do something about it. Saying and doing are two different things. So too are intent and action. It is important that our actions speak louder than our words. I often think of a quote that is attributed to Ralph Emerson, and it says, "What you do speaks so loudly that what you say I cannot hear." Actions speak volumes. The Good Samaritan did what was needed to be done. He reached in and he handed out. He went the extra mile. Expense comes when we use our financial resources to reach out, but money simply will not do it all. Effort and action come when we use our people power within us to reach out to our neighbors. Most of us don't truly appreciate all of our neighbors or think about our global neighborhood daily because we don't walk in their shoes. We don't breathe their breath. We don't think about what they are going through. Developing a heart of compassion is hard because it requires us to go with others to the places where they are weak and vulnerable and lonely and broken. The places that we don't want to be. Our purpose is to reach out with hope and with healing. It starts with a compassionate heart, and it involves a willingness to sacrifice. We are called to model our Maker, and Christ sets a model of active compassion for us to follow. So often Christians tell people that they will pray for them, and that's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing. It would be also good for us to do more. We all have something to offer because God has given us something to give. With the abundant love that God has given each of us, the compassion, the courage, and the mercy, who are we not to share that with all of God's people? If you think of the people you come across every day, would you stop for them? Do you avoid going downtown as not to see those people? Not to be in that part of the neighborhood? Have you ever prayed that God will open your eyes so that you will see the needs that are around you and then take the opportunity to respond with compassion? What moves you into action? It would be good if we stopped ignoring our wounded world. We are surrounded by a great deal of pain. Everywhere you look in society, people are plagued with anguish. Some are struck with injuries or illnesses that place them in physical pain. Some are dealing with stigma and scars of an emotional past. Some are living in the darkness and the despair of spiritual distress. We can stop ignoring people in pain, and we can start to get involved. It's all about action. Now, some people are involved. Maybe you sponsor a child in Honduras or somewhere else around the world. Maybe you're involved in a global outreach program. And I hope that everyone has taken the opportunity to be involved with the Fifth Sunday Matters initiative here at Grace, where we go out into the community. I'm not trying to underplay the impact you're making through what you're doing. It's awesome. Is there more that you can do? Is there people power within you that could help others? Maybe even prayer that could be expanded to include more of our global neighborhood. I do think it's important to realize that we could not possibly reach every person in need, but that's okay. Jesus isn't asking us to. He's asking for our obedience. He's asking us to reach out to our neighbors with love and compassion and mercy. Some of you know me well enough to know that I'm a huge lover of Elvis Presley music. I was doing some reading a while ago about Empire for a course that I'm taking, and at the same time a song kept coming into my mind, and I just pushed it aside, and I never thought too much about why it was coming to my mind. Then I was reading this scripture, and the same song kept coming back into my head. And then I stopped and I pondered and I realized why. That song is called "In the Ghetto." And the part of the song that kept coming back to me was, "People, don't you understand? A child needs a helping hand, or he'll grow to be an angry young man someday. Take a look at you and me. Are we too blind to see? Do we simply turn our heads and look the other way?" Is that what we're doing? Are we blind to the needs of others? Are we turning our heads away as not to see all of our neighbors? You know, I think at some point we look at the many people in this world and we know that there's no way we can help them all. In fact, sometimes it's just easy to cast blame and say, well, I guess that's what you get. That's what happens, just what you deserve. Or, well, it's not my fault, I'm not there. But all the blame and all the excuses in the world don't help one single person in need. Getting involved is the neighborly thing to do. You can't help every person, but you can reach out to someone. This world is full of neighbors that need the love of God that has been put in your heart. Just feeling bad about it won't help. Just wishing someone would do something about it won't help either. Jesus issued a strong challenge to those who hear this parable. These words are as valid today as they were 2,000 years ago. Now is the time. Now is the time to rise and to respond to the challenge. Jesus is still calling us to go and do likewise. So I ask you this morning, who is your neighbor? Those that you see that are in need, by the side of the road, in the ditch, beaten up and beaten down. Will you bend over and pick them up? Will you lend a helping hand? Will you live with generosity and compassion and love? Because that is what God would do for you.